All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I'm really excited for this next panel. I'm very excited to be joined by four of CTA's founding CEOs. And I think we're really going to have a great conversation. So we have Greg Clark, who is the co-founder and managing partner at Crosspoint Capital. But when CTA got started, he was at Symantec running that organization. We have Mark McLaughlin, who is on so many boards, I can't even keep track of it all. But at the time that CTA got started, he was the CEO of Palo Alto Networks. We have Ken Ji, who is the CEO of Fortinet and one of our founding CEOs. And then we also have Chris Young, formerly at Microsoft. Now, I think on several different boards as well, but at the time was the head of McAfee. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. It's really great to have you.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
So I think the first question I want to start with, and maybe I'll start with Mark and we can just go around, but what led you to establish the Cyber Threat Alliance? Was it a specific event or a series of events, or how did this all happen?
Basically, kind of coming to an understanding with like-minded individuals here that there's going to be massive innovation needed in cyber, which is going to mean there's going to be massive competition in cyber. But having said that, the threat intelligence itself, in my opinion, and I think these guys, when we talk through it, be sort of like a public good. So it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. Those were words we used back then. And we can compete on what you do with what you know, but what we know, there's really no reason why customers should pay for it again and again. And also, just as a matter of public policy, for lack of a better term, sharing that would be a very good idea. I broached that topic with Ken over breakfast one morning at his favorite restaurant. I forget which one it was, but we had a breakfast meeting, and he agreed. Not surprisingly, talked with Greg, talked with Chris. We all knew each other then those days, and still do. And it was a smaller industry, but when you got the leaders together, even though we were relatively smaller companies than any of them are today, you had the aggregate a lot of threat information. And if we could pull that together, then we would be able to do something with it. The idea was always that this would be an independent thing. It was never going to be inside one of the companies. For the first couple of years, it started off as with the companies running it. But as soon as we could, and Michael, who I got to know at the White House back when you were the cyber czar, seemed like the perfect person to take that on. And we were able to create an independent entity called CTA, which exists today and is thriving. And so sort of a roadmap there, but it really just started with, four guys agreeing that threat intelligence really just needs to be shared as best as possible and as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think the breakfast in the Santa Clara Convention Center.
That's it.
Yeah, also both of our company. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Even sometimes we compete, but we also see how we can do better with customer. That's all the idea. We kind of think about it. And at the same time, each company has kind of unique way to defend all this cyber attack, right? Some from networking side, some from endpoint side. Even the network side, there's different sector, there's a different part of infrastructure. So we say the common enemy we have is really how we can share the information more effectively, respond to all this attack quickly. So instead of all kind of depend on resource, which sometimes may focus on different area. So that's where Mark and I saw this discussion, and that seems great idea. And then that's where, okay, let's do it, because sometimes organized crime, they may be a little bit more organized. So that's what we need to do better job. So that's all the idea started. So in the end, it's a great job by the team, and especially me and Michael. Daniel, thanks for all the leadership over 10 years to doing more work.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Greg. So they managed to convince you to join this merry band. So
I would say, Michael, even though people think of all of us as serious head-to-head competitors, it was not really like that. Chris and I used to get a cup of coffee at the Pete's on Matilda off the 101, every couple months, and just compare notes on what was going on. And things like WannaCry happened and we're on the phone talking to each other about, okay, what do we know about this? How do we, kind of share information about that? And your organization has done a fantastic job about actually making that something that is just a matter of, formal uh, activity to be able to, just programmatically share that kind of information, which I think is a huge step forward for the industry. And as, Mark put it, it's really what you do with what you know. And, being a contributor of threat information was, I think it was also a big morale generator for definitely for Symantec, that we were doing that. That was super, the fight against the cyber criminal is, we're all on the good guy side. And that was really something that was fortifying for, I think, the industry and all kinds of reasons. So I thought it was a great idea. When I heard about it, I said, yeah, we'll dig into it. And, we really did. We went and really, I think with Mark's team at Palo did a ton of work on building the platform, which, should big credit to you, Mark, for making that happen because that was a lot of R&D that definitely didn't have a revenue line with it. And, we were dropping everything we knew in it, all the time. And I think it really changed things. It was great. So I was happy to get all the way behind it. And one of our key engineers, I think Joe Chen, who was a champion of it all that way, is a board member still at CTA, which is, fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris,
Yeah.
why did you buy into this idea?
When I got the call, I would tell you several of the topics that people have said resonated with me. Number one, I always believe that there is a collective industry versus the adversary approach that we had to take, and it's pretty obvious. It was obvious then. It's still true today, unfortunately. That irrespective of how big you are, you don't see everything that's happening in the threat landscape as an individual organization. Even the government doesn't see it all. And so the collective power that I thought we could bring together, and then channeling that into the defenses was really what I thought was necessary, and I think is still today necessary if we're going to advance ourselves in a way that we can have a reasonably safe environment. And sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't work as well, and it's just a constant process of getting better. And I think each individual company plays a role in that, and I think collectively we have to do that as well. And it's one of the reasons why I'm proud of what we did with CTA and getting it going, and really, Michael, what you and the current membership have done to bring it forward to today.
Here,
Well, I
here.
think, yeah, well, thanks. And I think it's, something that Mark said, we still talk about that today of, it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. And, I always talk about CTA being a competition make cybersecurity companies better at what they do so that they can be better for their customers and clients and compete even more effectively. So it serves both a collective purpose and a competitive purpose. And that's one of the things that I really like about CTA is it you can do both from this position. But we've talked about the fact that it took a lot of work to get CTA off the ground. Like it was not an easy thing. And so I think one of the things I also wanted to talk about was what did you find hard about, taking this idea and bringing it to execution? And that's actually something that, like all of your companies have to do, continuing to this day is take an idea and move it into execution. And there are challenges along the way. What did you find in sort of getting CTA off the ground were some of the biggest challenges, and how did you go about overcoming them? Anybody that wants to sort of jump on that?
Yeah, I can kick it off. I think right at the very beginning, there was, I would say, some light resistance, but definitely resistance on taking some of the really critical stuff that we knew and pushing it into the platform. And I'm sure that at the other organizations, there were people that said, "Hey, we know about this. No one else does. We should keep it." And really turning that from a negative force to a positive force, where 6, 9 months later, it was like we shared the most, or we shared a lot, was how I think the culture change needed to happen, which happened. But right at the very beginning, that was definitely a case. And then, what the sharing algorithms were being decided amongst pretty much our 4 companies, I think, if I remember all that correctly, which was, I think, very collaborative. But on the good side, also, I really enjoyed when we would show up at the meetings. I think they were quarterly from memory, and like we would all go, and just the connectivity between us and the other CEOs that joined there was absolutely beneficial for the industry, 100%, because we knew each other and we could pick up the phone. And, we were in a backdrop of sharing information, which was definitely, I think, fortifying for the industry. But initially, overcoming resistance, because it had been an industry that, you block the most, you stop the most, you're the most proficient, actually got you deals because you would score better in a bake-off, with guys who added up whether you had good threat stuff or not. And moving that to a completely different paradigm had some initial challenges, but I think we got rid of those, and the industry's better.
I'd add to what Greg said. I think the other part of it was really coming up with something that was useful from the data versus just having volume in the data. And I think there was one, if I recall correctly, it was APT3, where we did a deep dive, and actually were able to publish something that was, specific to that, that attack vector, that threat actor. And I thought, like, those are the kinds of examples that you wanted to be able to show as the CTA, to go along with the volume of threat intelligence that was out there, to actually be able to provide some insight. And so I thought that was one of the harder things, in addition to much of what Greg talked about. And just look, the general sense of it, it was a not-for-profit, getting people to be part of it, contribute to it, getting players to really invest the way we had invested, I think was one of the early challenges, and probably something, Michael, you still feel is not as easy as it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, to build on the comment you made, Chris, the campaign data was gold.
Yeah.
That was a big step forward. ISCs is one thing, but the actual campaign data that talked, we didn't have a MITRE attack framework going on back then, right? And so the campaign data, which I think, Mark, your organization was excellent at bringing that into the context of what we were doing there, was immensely valuable. And I think that changed the way we talked about threats. Inside Symantec was definitely affected to the good by being able to really articulate the campaign that was going on, and then here's the indicators, and that made it actually useful on the other side. So I think
I remember from the beginning is always what information to share, how to deal with this information, how to score, how to encourage company to share more. I think the early first few years, the format is amazing because each company will host the CTA meeting in our own office without the CEO out there. So that's all the decision maker together. We can make decision. We can solve the issue very, very quickly. That's all before the pandemic. I kind of still missing all that. Is all the top industry leader together and then address the most important issue, how to quickly respond to this attack, and then we can very, very effectively, more quickly make decision, locate resource behind it to support it. That's really make a difference. That's also making the CTA probably the industry most powerful, most efficient kind of information sharing organization right now.
Yeah. These are spot on. One of the challenges we had was just I'll say the legal aspect of it, right? I'm sure I know what happened. We'll go back to the company and said, hey, great news. We're going to share all our information for free. And the 4 CEOs are going to get together every quarter and talk, and then lawyers like, you're going to do what? And
antitrust everywhere.
Yeah. So really good credit to all these people on the phone that they said it's going to be fine, right? And you tell us how to do it, and we'll follow the rules and we'll do it. But I would just suggest to say, this is an observation, right? It's like, but to put this into context, imagine today, right? If the CEOs of the, and Ken's one of them still today, four largest cybersecurity companies in the world today met together every 90 days with the sole purpose of saying, how can we make information threat intelligence sharing better, and what can we do better for our joint customers? We're going to compete like banshees, right? But how do we make it better for our customers and for the world on threat intelligence sharing? Like, imagine that if that happened every 90 days, where the CEOs personally, took an interest in that, right, and made that happen. And that'll tell you what it was. And that's all credit due to the, top down interest of the folks here. And they went and they did it, right, and it worked. One interesting point, I know we haven't gotten there yet in the CTA, but we'll all recall this because Ken brought it up or alluded to it, was there was the idea in the beginning that this would be an economy of all the threat intelligence would go in and it's worth something. What you put in, you can get out in worth. And it wasn't how much you put in, it was how valuable and interesting or differentiated it was. And then the idea would be some sort of economy here, right? So that smaller players could put in very interesting stuff because geographically they see something interesting, or industry wise, and then then they can spend that to take out, right? So there was a lot of, I'm not saying that's the right approach. I'm saying there was a lot of really interesting ideas about how this could really work, and it would be in everybody's interest to do it. But to whatever these three guys said here earlier, all credit is due to the fact of you just did it, right? We met every 90 days and took that approach. And you know what? Organizations will follow despite all the objections, right? When you're doing something that's just right. So.
Right.
Yeah, and with each other always were fun. So
That's good. I have a couple of photos, Ken and Mark and Chris are in them of what was probably like the G10 of cyber at the time. We take the photos of all the CEOs that were there. Michael, you were, of course, there. Yeah. Those are good photos. We actually had, the powerhouses of the industry at the time when all there and all making sense and talking about things that were pro customer, pro cyber defense. And, it was definitely super refreshing,
Yeah. And it's interesting to me too, like, you've referenced, CTA uses a scoring algorithm, for example, to assign a point value to the incoming threat intelligence. And I would say that the algorithm that we designed back then actually ended up working far better and for far longer than we originally anticipated. And it's really only been in the last, year or so that we've come to the realization that it's time for an update to that. And so we're starting the process to really update that algorithm and look at how it needs to evolve to meet some of the new challenges of today. But I don't think anybody really anticipated that it would be able to hang around for 8 years, with only sort of minor adjustments, right? So it shows the degree to which that was, well designed. And Chris, you referenced like the crypto wall paper. That has now evolved into our joint analytic reports that we do on a regular basis. And we released one on how AI is affecting the cybersecurity industry and things like that back in January. And we're getting ready to do one on quantum computing and how that will affect the cybersecurity industry. So we've continued a lot of these ideas and evolved them. And that's kind of where I want to take the conversation for the, last 10 minutes that we have here is, from your vantage points, and all of you have very interesting vantage points and work on a lot of, different boards and from different perspectives. Greg, you see a lot of different, companies in your portfolio. Like, how do you actually see the cyber threat landscape, the need for threat intelligence sharing? How does that need to evolve? How should we be thinking about, taking CTA into its second decade? How do we think about how we need to evolve the organization and, really going forward? What should we not change, right? What do we need to make sure that we don't lose as we go forward. And maybe Chris, I'll just start with you just to, pick on somebody.
Well, I think it's important to note the landscape has changed quite a bit. Like as a few people have pointed out, I think Greg, I still have those pictures actually. It's interesting of when we used to all get together. And but the industry is very different now. You have a different, obviously some of the companies represented are much bigger, like Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks. McAfee and Symantec are very different than they were back in those days. But look, the company I was most recently a part of, Microsoft, has become a massive player in cyber. Cisco's continued to be like, so you've got a different landscape of players. I mean, I think Mark mentioned, when we all first met you, Michael, you were the cyber czar, in the White House office building, next to the White House, and I but since then, we've, CISA's been established, and you've had a few administrations of CISA, which has played a bigger role in trying to convene the industry to do, some of the kinds of things that we had originally envisioned in and around CTA. That being said, I still think CTA is an incredibly important part of the landscape. And so I think, and I think as everybody's talked about, really being able to track campaigns and then making sure that we've got a good ability to coordinate a response to these campaigns is critical. And I think that's one of those things that has to stay in place because I don't think it's possible for any one body to coordinate all the different players in the right way to respond to these threats as they intensify at any given point in time.
Right on. A couple comments along those lines. The sheer amount of IOC-like information that comes in the threat feed is a torrent of thousands of things. Those thousands of things are important to certain controls in the defense. But the high grade, the dial tone that you really need to pay attention to is this campaign data. Things like what's going on with Scattered Spider, Salt Typhoon. These are the things that it takes a little while for the vendors to really pick these things apart and really understand them, and then be able to give people intelligence that's highly useful. I think that if we would redoing it or doing it again, making sure that there's sort of a bifurcation between really complicated campaign stuff or tricky stuff. These guys are really smart and they do some really tricky stuff. And then all the IOC work that you just need to put in your indicator dial tone is essential, because you get overwhelmed with just the volume, and really being able to see the super high value attack vector, I think is something that we're also an investor in Cyware, which is the sharing infrastructure of the ISACs. And I sort of think of CTA like an ISAC for vendors, right? And then if you look at the amount of data that's rolling through the combo of the FS ISAC, the healthcare ISAC, the auto ISAC, the A&D ISAC, which is what that is, there's hundreds of thousands of those boiling through there every day that show up at the ISAC members. They've got the same problem. They've got, okay, there's too much. How do I filter out the really important? And can we use some AI to bring some sense to that volume? I think is logical. And Ken, your company has solved these things. You're dealing with that as well and making sense of it all. But I think that's something to really think about for the future, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, also like compared 10 years ago, the whole cybersecurity industry landscape kind of different now. Like Chris and Greg mentioned, there's some bigger player like Microsoft, Google are starting to come in, and even the threat landscape also a little bit different now. So that's where how to kind of making CTA kind of more meaningful to the industry and to helping the whole customer base get more and more important, right? So I found out probably like 10 years ago, all the founding company become majority of the cybersecurity industry. Now kind of some bigger player come in and then somehow we also, if we can get them also starting part of the CTA share some information, and we'll make the industry much better. more efficient to defend all this attack. On the other side, technology also changing, whether leverage AI, quantum computing also kind of important. So maybe we try to see what we can do to really get some new member, get some other meaningful player working together. That's probably can help in the whole industry.
Here.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think, to me, cyber's three dimensions, if not more, the surface area, the depth, and then the sophistication, right? And bringing those together in a meaningful way that's coherent and you can understand it. And most importantly, you can action very quickly is, really will depend on the future of cyber, let alone, how we share information. I know we're going to run out of time, Michael. I did want to make one suggestion to folks. And I know the other three guys here did this before, and because there was a turning point. There was a number of turning points in CTA. The meetings happened, but there's one I remember in particular. It was pretty subtle, but it was real. There was, without exaggeration, every EVC I did with customers or customer meetings, and I know these guys did a lot of it too. I always left the last few minutes of the meeting to talk about the CTA and to the customer, right? And just say, hey, I just want you to know this is happening. But the reason I did that, one, is education. But secondly, I would say to you, listen, the next time, there's nothing, this is not about Palo Alto Networks or Fortinet. It's like, it's really for everybody, right? But I said, the next time you're doing RFP, please put in the RFP a question that says, are you a member of the CTA? And if not, why not? And, I thought money talks, right?
It absolutely helps.
I remember one time, one of my team members, sales came in a big bank. There was an RFP. It was a lot of money. And like question number 97 said, are you a member of the CTA? And if not, why not? And I was like, yes, right. So I would encourage, there's always, and it's just the practical aspects of like getting people to share stuff. So I'd encourage everybody listening, that this is above and beyond any one company. That's one practical piece of advice is educate customers and put it in the RFPs, right? And all these people, big companies, are going to,
that's very good.
I don't know if they're going to do it, but they're going to start paying attention. So,
and just in terms of usefulness, recently, I suggested CTA to the lead engineers and product managers at ExtraHop. They looked at the technology and the threat sharing information and joined. I didn't mandate that they join. We're the sponsor of ExtraHop where I work now, but they joined on its merits because it really helped them. And so I think for those of you in the audience that have vendors, there is an immediate benefit to joining CTA to a control that is beneficial from that threat information. And so I think, it is definitely Mark's suggestion to say, push it into the RFP. Usually on the other side of that, it is, hey, wow, I didn't know you could get this. It's like, this is great. This is one of the best threat intel feeds there is. And so that's just a little bit of a customer story, if you like, for a new one joining.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today at the Threat Intelligence Practitioners Summit. I really, really appreciate see all of you again. We've got a lot planned for CTA. We're going to continue continuing the work that all of you got started, and I hope that you continue to be proud of the work that CTA is doing today. But I am mindful of the fact that we are the last thing before lunch here on the East Coast, so I'm going to bring this to a close and have the attendees here at the conference head on to lunch. But thank you again for all your support through the years and for the effort that you made in getting CTA started and for joining us today. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Congratulations.
Yeah.